General Motors could spend more on a single ashtray program than American Motors had for a whole car. That was the box Dick Teague worked in. The smallest automaker in Detroit. Always broke. Always one bad year from closing. So he did something the big companies never had to. He took one car and quietly turned it into 5. Same doors, same glass, same tooling, wildly different cars. And the man doing it had been designing with one working eye since he was a kid. So how does someone who lost an eye in a crash end up running a design studio for more than 20 years at a company the rest of Detroit had already written off? Start with the eye, because everything else grows out of it. The crash happened when he was young. Sources argue about exactly how young, but they agree on the part that matters. He came out of it with one working eye, and no real depth perception for the rest of his life, which is a strange handicap for a man whose whole job was judging the shape of things in 3 dimensions. He never made a big deal of it. He learned to see the way sculptors do, by feel and memory as much as sight, running his hands over clay models to check a curve his eye could not fully measure. And by the time he was a teenager in Los Angeles, he was already deep in the local car scene, hanging around midget racers and hot rods, sketching bodies for anyone who would let him. That is the first thing to understand about him. He did not come up through some fancy design school. He came up through the garages. His first real break came at General Motors, drawing for Oldsmobile in the late 1940s. But the job that truly shaped him was Packard. In the 1950s, Packard was a proud old luxury name in serious trouble, the kind of company that had once outclassed Cadillac and was now quietly running out of money. Teague was one of the designers trying to save it. His big statement was a show car called the Predictor, built for the 1956 auto show season. It had hidden headlights, roof panels that lifted automatically as the doors opened, and reverse-slanted roof pillars, the kind of idea that would echo through American styling for years afterward. For a company circling the drain, it was a bold swing. It was also, in a way, a rehearsal, because Teague got a front-row seat to something most designers never have to see. He watched a car company go under. Packard's real business collapsed in 1956, and the lesson burned itself in. He learned exactly what it looks like when the money simply runs out. He would spend the rest of his career designing as if that could happen again at any moment. And at his next job, it nearly did. Over and over. Teague landed at American Motors around 1959 and worked his way up to head of design. On paper, that was a promotion. In practice, it was the hardest styling job in the country. American Motors was the little one. It had been stitched together out of Nash and Hudson, 2 names that were already fading, and it stayed alive by selling sensible, thrifty ramblers to people who thought the big 3 were showing off. That was a fine plan, right up until the big 3 noticed and built their own small cars. From then on, American Motors was always the smallest player at the table, holding the smallest stack of chips. Here is the number that tells the whole story. In a good year, each of the big 3 could pour hundreds of millions of dollars into new tooling alone. American Motors had a small fraction of that, and it had to cover the whole company with it. New tooling, the massive steel dies that stamp out body panels, is the single most expensive part of building a car. So, Teague made a rule out of pure need. If he already had a good door, a good roof, a good piece of glass, he was going to use it again, and then again after that. He liked to say his job was to make $1 do the work of 5, and he mostly meant it literally. Where the big 3 saw a finished car and moved on, Teague saw a parts bin he could raid for the next 10 years. For years, that meant careful, quiet reskins of the Rambler. Same basic body underneath, fresh sheet metal on top, a car that looked new for roughly the price of looking new. It kept the lights on. But it was never going to make anyone's heart beat faster. Then, in 1968, Teague finally got to show what he could actually do. The Javelin was American Motors building a proper pony car at last, a long-hood, short-deck coupe aimed straight at the Mustang. It was clean, it was handsome, and for once, it did not look like an apology for being cheap. It sold well enough to matter, and it went racing in the Trans Am series against Mustangs and Camaros, later pulling in Roger Penske and Mark Donohue to run the effort. A broke little company, trading paint with Detroit's best, but the Javelin was really just the setup, because Teague's team took that same car and, in a move that still makes designers grin, they cut it in half. They pulled a foot of length out of the middle, right behind the seats, shortened the wheelbase to 97 inches, and turned a 4-seat coupe into a 2-seat sports car. That was the AMX. A real American 2-seater, the only one besides the Corvette, built for little more than the cost of some new stampings and a lot of nerve. You could order it with a 390 cubic inch V8. Craig Breedlove took one out and set a stack of speed records with it, and the whole thing existed because a company that could barely make payroll let its designer play surgeon on a car it already owned. And it worked on the track too. In the early 1970s, Donahue and the Javelin actually won the Trans Am Championship outright, beating the factory Mustangs and Camaros that had budgets American Motors could only dream about. The smallest company in Detroit did not just show up. For a couple of seasons, it won. That was the pattern nobody outside the building really noticed at the time. Teague was not designing more cars. He was designing the same car more cleverly and getting more mileage out of every single panel than anyone thought possible. By the end of the 1960s, the threat had changed shape. Cheap imported cars were flooding in from Germany and Japan, and American Motors could not begin to afford a clean-sheet small car to fight them. So Teague reached for the scalpel again, and this time he cut even bolder. He took the Hornet, the company's new compact, and chopped the tail clean off. He shortened it, capped it with a steep little hatchback, and called it the Gremlin. It was the first home-built American subcompact, and it beat both Chevrolet's Vega and Ford's Pinto to the showroom floor, arriving on April 1st, 1970. Yes, April Fool's Day. Make of that what you will. There is a story that Teague first sketched the Gremlin on the back of an air sickness bag during a flight. It is a wonderful story. It also gets repeated absolutely everywhere, which is usually a good reason to hold it a little loosely. But true or not, it fits the man perfectly, because the basic point does not change. He designed a whole new car, mostly by taking a careful, clever bite out of an old one. And that Hornet body just kept on giving. Over the next 20-odd years, Teague and his team spun it into the Gremlin, then the Concorde, then the Spirit, and eventually the Eagle. One basic platform, stretched and reskinned and reimagined again and again, quietly doing the work of a whole model lineup. That is not laziness. That is a magic trick performed on a budget the Big Three would have openly laughed at. The Gremlin stuck around too, selling for most of the decade, and Teague kept it interesting on the cheap the way he kept everything interesting on the cheap. There was even a version with an interior trim to look like blue denim, complete with copper rivets, done as a tie-in with a jeans company. Cheap to build, impossible to ignore, exactly the kind of trick a company with no money learns to love. He even managed to have fun with the leftovers. In 1974, he wrapped the aging Matador in a swoopy, tunneled headlight coupe body that looked like nothing else on the road, and had it dressed up in special editions with designer interiors. It was the smallest company in town swinging for glamour, on parts it already had sitting in the bin. If you are enjoying this one, take a second and subscribe. We dig up a forgotten piece of American car history like this every single week, and the next one is already in the works. Then came the car everyone remembers. In 1975, Teague launched the Pacer, and there has truly never been anything else quite like it. It was short, but almost as wide as a full-size car, and it was wrapped in so much curved glass that people started calling it the Flying Fish Bowl. That width was not an accident. Teague designed the Pacer from the inside out, starting with the space the people needed and building the body around it, so a tiny car on the outside felt shockingly roomy once you were sitting in it. He wanted it to feel like the future had arrived early. He designed the whole thing around a compact rotary engine that American Motors was counting on General Motors to supply. That engine never came. General Motors quietly scrapped its rotary program, and Teague was left holding a wild little car with a big empty hole where the future was supposed to sit. He had to fill it with American Motors' own ancient, heavy, straight six. The spaceship ended up with a workhorse heart. He also did something quietly brilliant that almost nobody noticed. The passenger door on a Pacer is longer than the driver's door by 4 inches. The thinking was simple. People load into the back seat from the curb side, so give that side the bigger opening. It is thoughtful, it is truly strange, and it is very, very Teague. The Pacer sold quickly at first, then faded fast. For years afterward, it lived on as a punchline, parked right next to the Gremlin on every ugliest cars list ever printed. Hold that thought though, because the joke did not age the way everyone expected it would. By the start of the 1980s, American Motors was running on fumes, and Teague pulled off the last real trick of his career. Maybe his very best. He took the Concorde, a perfectly ordinary compact sedan, and joined its body to a four-wheel drive system. The result, launched for 1980, was the AMC Eagle. A normal-looking family car that stood up tall on raised suspension and drove all four of its wheels, in a time when four-wheel drive meant a truck and nothing else. Nobody had a word for it back then. We have one now. It was a crossover. Teague built the first everyday American crossover, the exact type of vehicle sitting in half the driveways on your street today, and he built it the only way he ever knew how, by bolting together two things the company already had lying around. But his quiet masterpiece was hiding over in the Jeep building. American Motors had bought Jeep back in 1970, and Teague's studio was handed the job of replacing the ancient Wagoneer. What they drew, and put on sale in 1984, was the Jeep Cherokee, the boxy, upright, honest little Cherokee that more or less invented the modern SUV as something a normal family actually buys instead of a farm truck. And true to form, they built it clever. Instead of the heavy separate frame that every rugged vehicle used back then, the Cherokee used a single welded body structure, which made it lighter, tighter, and cheaper to build all at once. That one decision set the pattern the whole industry would later copy. Jeep kept selling that basic design, almost untouched, until the early 2000s. Nearly 20 years out of a shape drawn by a broke company that was not even supposed to still be here. Here is the irony, and it is a heavy one. Teague retired in 1983. A few years later, in 1987, American Motors finally ran out of road and was swallowed whole by Chrysler. The company he had spent his whole life keeping alive did not survive. But that Cherokee did. Chrysler kept building it, barely changed, deep into the 1990s, and it became one of the most profitable vehicles the company owned. The little car company folded. Its designer's last great idea went on to pay Chrysler's bills for a decade. And the Pacer, the Gremlin, the AMX. Somewhere along the line, the laughing quietly stopped. Collectors started hunting down the weird, brave, one-eyed genius cars, and prices began to climb. The exact figures move around and are worth checking before you ever quote them out loud. But a clean AMX today is a serious, sought-after collector car. Not a punchline anymore. The rest of his ideas aged even better. That tall, all-wheel drive Eagle everyone found so odd in 1980? Look out the window. The crossover took over the world. The boxy little Cherokee he drew on a shoestring became the blueprint every SUV still borrows from. The man who was mocked for building strange cars on no money turned out to be right about almost all of it. He was just early, and broke, and working for a company nobody expected to remember. History has a funny way of quietly settling those debts. Dick Teague passed away in 1991. Away from the studio, he had spent his weekends buried in a garage full of brass-era antiques, the kind of cars with wooden wheels and hand cranks, restoring them himself by hand. A man forced to build the future out of scraps for a living, quietly going home to the deepest part of the past. One working eye and a pile of beautiful old iron. He never got the budget. He just refused to let that be the end of the sentence. If you want another story like this one, the video on screen is about another car that had every reason to fail and somehow refused to. Go watch it.